powered by Riverside.
Hello, everyone. Whether you're changing diapers, outside grilling, maybe you're mowing the lawn, or maybe you're just laying on the couch letting the kids run wild, welcome to the Young Dad Podcast. I'm your host, Jay, and today I have a great guest with me. I have a fellow PNW Pod Gang member and podcast host, Shea. Shea, welcome to the show today.
Well, hello. Thanks so much for having me. Really appreciate you inviting me on.
Of course, I'm excited to have you. This is going to be super fun. The best part about this was there was no time zone issue you had to do. So
Had to
that's
deal with
always,
those.
and especially for us being on the West Coast, like it's even more challenging at times.
Yes, exactly. Well, and for us right now, it's still light out, which is nice.
It's super light out, and it's after 8 p.m., so it's lovely. It's such a great feeling. Regardless, welcome, Shea. I'm excited to have you. Before we get into it, right here at the top, I just want to take care of a little bit of housekeeping, a little bit of cleaning, a little bit of business, as they say in the industry. I want to shout out my opening sponsor of the podcast, Forefathers Apparel. If you've been with me for any amount of time, listening for any amount of time, you know that I love Forefathers Apparel. They became a great partner, sponsor of the podcast more than a year ago. And let me tell you about them if you haven't been listening real quick. What Forefathers did is Nick and his team, they set out to create dad clothing that is not just stylish, but also practical and comfortable. They understand that dads go above and beyond, and our clothing is designed to keep, and their clothing, sorry, I feel like I'm part of them, honestly, at this point, is designed to keep up with that. Their team of dad designers set out to build performance clothing because no existing line represented dad. There was nothing out there. There was just a cookie cutter, black, gray, blue, red, maybe an occasional orange or green out there, polo, but nothing that really captured like dadding in itself. So that's what they set out to do. They set out to make clothes that represent the dad lifestyle. They took all of our favorite dadisms, donuts with dad, the elementary school classic, mowing the lawn, mow glow, gone fishing, pizza night, movie night, meat sweats, and so many more, printing them on the best performing materials, polos, hoodies, socks, hats, daddy and me polos, so many awesome things. And they did it to fit the dad bod, and you'll thank them later for that. With the code Young Dad, you can save 20% on your entire purchase and help out the podcast greatly. So that's enough of the business. Let me tell you a little bit about Rainy Day Rabbit Holes, that podcast that Shea is the host of.
That's my baby.
You can join Shea and Jody on the Rainy Day Rabbit Holes podcast for a whimsical journey through Pacific Northwest history. Explore weird tales. I mean, it's the Pacific Northwest. Everything's weird up here. Wacky legends, which there's plenty of, and hilarious anecdotes that define the region's charm. With infectious laughter and boundless silliness, each episode promises entertainment and a deeper appreciation for the PNW's unique quirks. And you can tune into that weekly for laughter and exploration. So with that, Shea, welcome to the Rainy Day Rabbit Holes and Young Dad podcast collab here to our listeners.
Hello.
Please tell us what inspired Rainy Day Rabbit Holes.
Well, I mean, really, the Pacific Northwest inspired us. Jody and I really bonded last year we went on a cruise together, and then we were camping, and while we were walking on the beach here in the Pacific Northwest on a little island called Harsteen Island, we came across an old sneaker that was covered in seaweed, and it brought to mind the tale of the Salish Sea feet discoveries, where all these feet have been washing up on beaches in the Pacific Northwest since about 2007. And I was like, man, the Pacific Northwest is just full of so much weird, interesting stuff. Somebody really needs to do a podcast about that. Now, we'd had a couple beers. We were camping. We both got really excited about the idea. And the next day, when sober minds prevailed, I looked at her and I was like, do you remember that conversation we had about a podcast? And she's like, I'm in, let's do it. And That's how it was born. We even came up with the name right then because I was like, man, it has to have something to do with the rain in there. And you get really obsessed with these different things, and you spend all night long looking up information about it and going down that rabbit hole. So that's rainy day rabbit holes.
That's perfect. It's so fitting because there is so many things about the Pacific Northwest and Washington in particular.
Yeah.
So far along your journey, what has been one of the weirdest things about the Pacific Northwest that you've found?
Fred Chrisman. So
Fred
Chrisman, which is a name that most people have not heard, but I fell into this man's weird story when I was researching the Maury Island incident. Now, the Maury Island incident, I had heard in passing over the years that it had something to do with UFOs. And it actually was the beginning of kind of the UFO flying saucer craze. It actually started right here in the Pacific Northwest, one with a saucer sighting by a man named Kenneth Arnold in 1947. And then shortly after, there was a reporting of flying saucers over the Puget Sound just off of Vashon Island or Maury Island. Maury Island's a part of Vashon Island. And this Fred Chrisman guy was this character that was wrapped up in the Maury Island incident. And the more you look into him, the weirder things get, where he's claiming that he was abducted by this race of people that live in the middle of the earth, and they're like weird lizard people. And also he was suspected of maybe having something to do with the assassination of JFK. He was suspected of being one of the three tramps, and there's a famous picture of Daley Plaza, and there's these three kind of rough looking dudes that they call the three tramps, and people have said that was him. He has ties to the only person who was ever actually put on trial for having something to do with the JFK assassination. And then he started this very weird, incredibly bizarre right-wing radio station in Tacoma. And he just had all of these weird stories and ideas about himself. He was bizarre. So Fred Chrisman is just the weirdest person I've come across. You know, here in the Pacific Northwest, we started out in the, mid 1800s, and there was a lot of this pioneer spirit and a lot of people just kind of coming in, and it was very much the Wild West out here. So we always find something weird. We're always in the 1880s, it seems like, in our podcast.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
Makes sense. So I think I have heard that name before when it comes to UFOs. And if you listen to any of like the really big podcasters when they've gone through like the UFO things like Rogan or those kind of big podcaster names, when they talk about him, I'm pretty sure Fred Chrisman is mentioned in those conversations.
Yeah, it's possible. There's a lot of conspiracy theorists who buy into his stuff, but I personally think that he was somebody who just really was addicted to the attention and the controversy and really liked to have that air of mystique about him. By all accounts, he was just kind of an a-hole.
Makes sense.
Who smoked 3 packs a day, that kind of, he was a legend in his own mind sort of thing. And he just railed against the establishment in a way that was really detrimental to the city of Tacoma. He was like, he was accusing everybody of being communists all the time and stating that
naturally
inclusivity and diversity training was brainwashing and, that sort of thing. He would have gotten along really well right now in certain political circles.
Yeah, that he would. So I'm looking through here just over at your guys' catalog. Have you done, or is there anything coming about Bigfoot? Because that is the mascot, if you will, of us PNW people.
Yeah, and he's on our show, Art.
Okay, exactly. So when people think of the Northwest, they most likely think of rain, twilight, and Bigfoot.
Yes.
Or Sasquatch.
Yes.
Have you guys dug into Sasquatch?
We have. So back last fall, Jody did an episode about Ape Canyon, which is a pretty famous.
This is not a Bigfoot
Bigfoot
podcast. I was
podcast.
watching Ape Canyon.
Yeah. Early
Okay.
on, I was really trying to embrace the whole this is not a X podcast in my names, but that kind of fell by the wayside. Yeah, so Ape Canyon happened in the 20s, and there were these miners down in near Mount St. Helens in southern Washington. And they were in this cabin and they encountered a group of Bigfoots that supposedly terrorized their cabin all night long. And this was kind of the first real big Bigfoot encounter that was reported. And of course, people over the years have disseminated the whole thing and gone back. And some people think it's a hoax. Some people think that it was just misidentification of other creatures that were outside, plus lots of alcohol, which that's kind of where I am, is miners in the 20s, you know. There was
Yeah.
probably some moonshine, and especially at that time, I want to say this was like 1926, so it would have been the midst of prohibition. So what liquor they had was probably moonshine, which was probably tainted with methanol, which really affects your brain. So,
Yeah,
you
did some
know,
stuff to you.
yeah, I kind of fall on I'm on the, so here's the dynamic between me and Jody is I'm the skeptic and she's the believer. So when it
Okay.
comes to ghosts or UFOs or Bigfoot, I'm always trying to come up with the scientific explanation to explain it, and she's the one who really wants to believe the more paranormal explanation. So it works well because we can make fun of each other.
So what is like the scientific explanation for Bigfoot then?
Well, I personally think and also what other people have said too, is that if there was a Bigfoot, we would have found some sort of definitive proof of it. We would have found a body. We would have found some sort of trace of it that could be identified using DNA. I mean, at best, some unknown primate that may be out there, though that's unlikely. I don't think there's any primates in the Pacific Northwest. And I think mostly it's hoaxes, wishful thinking, alcohol, and just the human imagination. Our brains are amazing things, and I don't know that we can always trust some of the input that's coming in. So that's where I fall.
That makes sense. I'm pretty similar to you in that regard then. Like it's a cool thought,
Yeah.
but you think at this point with drones and technology and everything, like we would have found Bigfoot 20, 30, 40 years ago.
We would have found a
Kind of thing
body
with helicopter.
somewhere.
Yeah, they don't live forever kind of thing.
Right.
Like I believe there's probably like alternative civilizations that are deep in the woods, deep out there kind of thing that we may not know about, maybe small little clans or villages or things like that. I don't think there's any escaped apes.
Yeah.
But I mean, I have watched all the Planet of the Apes movies, and they are down just in California.
Right.
So they're not far.
I mean, I'm more likely to believe in a sea monster because it's hard to plumb
Yes.
the depths of the ocean, and the ocean is vast and a lot harder for us to get our eyeballs on and understanding. And we're constantly finding new species of animals in the ocean, right? So I'm more likely to
Exactly.
believe in a sea monster, but I'm thinking in the depths of the ocean. I'm not, there's been we did an episode on sea monsters of the Sailor Sea,
Mm.
and a lot of them it's been misidentification and straight up hoaxes, and mostly misidentification though. That's what a lot of sea monsters have been over the centuries, is just misidentification of really weird looking sea creatures that are just amazing in their own right. Like the oarfish, I think it was the one that is often misidentified back in our seafaring days by soldiers. And even, the great giant Pacific octopus, especially if you get pulled into the water by one, he's going to be a monster.
No, 100%. Yeah, I don't think there's a lot in terms of. I would agree. There's probably more than likely something in the sea, in the depths somewhere. I don't think it's wants to be. If it wanted to be discovered, I mean, if it's that big, it has to be extremely intelligent,
Right.
Because it's gonna have the biggest brain, it's gonna have the biggest capacity, it's gonna be the biggest predator, but it's also gonna be the biggest like hunted kind of thing. Like animals, they're smart, they're smart creatures, pack mentality. But I think if it really wanted to be found, it probably would have been found,
Right.
kind of thing.
Right.
But I don't think anything's coming into the Puget Sound to wreak havoc
No.
right now.
No.
So
And I'm also one who believes that there's so much amazing there's so many amazing things in this world already. Why do we need anything else? You know, if you just even just looking at the giant Pacific octopus, that's an incredible creature and that's alien to us, right? If you want
yeah,
to look at aliens, like right there's an octopus. It is so different. Their brain is so different. I mean, they've got practically 9 brains, right? Because their neurons run down their arms. And just their intelligence
yeah,
is so different than ours, and that's alien right there. Like, why do we need to go to anything paranormal when we have everything here that we have so much to learn about? I don't feel like we need to expand our knowledge outside of our current world, explore our current world more and understand it better. That's my
definitely.
TED Talk. Thank you.
I like it. Like it.
We can
Bravo,
talk to
bravo,
you guys.
bravo.
Bye.
But what are some of those paranormal things that are known throughout the Pacific Northwest? Because there's a lot of things up here. Of course, we're Salem, Oregon, the Salem witch trials.
Well, that
and
was Salem, Massachusetts.
that was Massachusetts. I'm just
Yes.
not. Thank you.
No worries.
Sure.
And we actually did an episode. We connected with another podcaster on the Effed Up History podcast. And she actually lives in Salem, Massachusetts, and she specializes in the witch trials of the 16th and 17th century. Or I guess it would be the 17th and 18th century. I always get the whole century numbering things off. And so we did a crossover episode with her where she talked about the origin, basically the old origins of what would came to be the current satanic panics of our century through those witch trials. And then we went on in our episode to talk about the satanic panic starting in the 1950s, 60s, 70s, and 80s, and then up to the kind of QAnon thing. So that was fun where we did manage to connect the Salem witch trials to the Pacific Northwest because the satanic panic of the 1980s actually really started in Victoria, British Columbia, with the book Michelle Remembers. Are you familiar with that book in your mental health profession?
I probably should be more recall.
So this is the one where this young woman, Michelle, she had unfortunately a really traumatic miscarriage, and she was really struggling with it. And this was the 70s, and her doctor called up her former psychologist and said, Michelle's not getting over her miscarriage. I don't understand why. And sent him to this Larry Pazder guy. And Larry Pazder had worked with her in the past. And he's like, Michelle, I don't understand. We worked out all of your problems. So I don't understand why you're not getting over your traumatic miscarriage. You're being a silly woman. So it must be something else that you don't remember. And so through hypnosis and suggestion, he started this whole thing where all of a sudden she was recalling, quotes, memories of ritual satanic abuse. And so that's where that all started. And then her and this mental health professional started a romantic relationship, very professional, and wrote this book, went on tour, and this book became the spark for the satanic panic of the late 70s, early 80s, to the point where law enforcement was using this book as a manual on teaching officers how to recognize the signs of satanic ritual abuse. It's a bonkers story. Yeah, it was a story. Exactly.
I can't say I'm familiar with that one before.
Yeah, that one has a lot of very things that make you want to scream and pull your hair out at the conduct of a mental health professional, my gosh, what is that?
Yeah, the
That's weird.
crackly.
Yeah, that was
It's
weird.
the paranormal. That
A
PNW, that
ghost getting
Pacific
mad at me.
Northwest, PNW paranormal, nothing like it. No, I would say the only things like I can really remember is what are some things that I can remember, like big stories, like growing up. I remember what was weird growing up about Washington? Everything. Everyone just thinks you're weird when you're from Washington, or from the Northwest.
Oh yeah, they think moss grows between your toes.
No, I just remember like the serial killers because we've had serial killer stuff like along the I-5 corridor.
Yeah.
Like tons, like the Green River Killer.
Oh yeah,
There's been
Gary
plenty
Ridgway.
of addition. Yeah, Gary Ridgway. That's probably the biggest one like I can like pull off the top of my head. But I know there's been Bundy. Yeah, everyone knows Bundy. My bad. I don't know how Gary Ridgway was before. I just remember his trial. Like I was a kid when maybe I was like a preteen or something. I don't remember. But Ridgway, I remember Ridgway because I remember watching him on the news with my grandma.
Yeah, he got caught in, I want to say 98. And actually, Ted Bundy assisted Ted Bundy was in prison already, and Ted Bundy assisted the task force in creating a profile for Gary Ridgway. And he was actually correct on several of the profile points he came up with. It was bonkers. Yeah. So
that's crazy.
Yeah.
So did Ridgway get some inspiration from Bundy?
No, Ridgway he was again one of those serial killers who had a very destructive childhood, and he hated women, and that's kind of where that went. Yeah, I want to say was convicted of 49 murders, but confessed to like 78. Because I think
there was more.
Yeah, well, his 49th identified victim actually happened just this February, where they finally identified the remains of his 49th known victim. And I think he went back to trial for that one as well. Now he's going to die in prison, but yeah, he confessed to at least 78. I want to say something like that. I don't remember all the numbers. I have too much knowledge of serial killers in my head.
That's okay, because he was like one of those like really big names that was out there, like post Bundy in the Northwest. And I know there's been plenty of additional deaths along the I-5 because it's a big trucking corridor.
Yeah.
So there's always that. Those big trucking corridors are huge when it comes to crime and murders specifically.
Yeah.
I don't understand the logic. I get it because it's an easy kind of cover up because you're there and gone.
Right. Well, especially, before, when people were still regularly hitchhiking, that seemed to be how a lot of these killers got their victims, was just people who were hitchhiking.
Yeah. So I'm trying to look back here. What has been like your favorite thing about like doing the podcast, being from the Pacific Northwest? Like what's just your favorite thing about the Pacific Northwest? Something wacky or weird or fun that like everyone should know about the Northwest?
Something weird or wacky about the Pacific Northwest. For me personally, I don't know if this is something weird or wacky, but doing this podcast has really taught me a lot about the history of the area that I live in. And it's a really rich history, and it's been really eye-opening and really fulfilling to learn that history. Just the spirit of the people who came here, coming over here from the East Coast with nothing and just trying to build a life for yourself. And it's been really interesting, and kind of the lawlessness, because we get a kick out of the really like salacious stuff. So we get a kick of people behaving badly in the 1800s. And so it's just been really, really cool, just the endearing spirit of the Northwest. And yeah, I mean, that's kind of the thing. And as far as podcasting, my favorite thing has been the relationships that I've made. the people I've met, the other podcasters that I've come to know and communicate with. I mean, you're one of them that we met on Threads through the whole PNW pod gang.
Yes.
And then the other people, the historians that I've met, I've made friends with several historians. Recently, because of the Maury Island incident, the Summer of Saucers episode, and the Fred Chrisman thing, I met a couple of filmmakers in the area. So Brian Shickley is an animator. He did the Fred Chrisman animated short film. That was kind of where that was my gateway drug into this universe. And then that led me to Steve Edmondson, who was part of the film, the Maury Island incident. And he's the one who puts on the Men in Black birthday bash and is really big involved in that community. And that's been really fun. I've recently met Brad Holden, who is an author and historian. He wrote the book Seattle Bootleggers. I think it's called like Crime, Greed in the Queen City. So I can't remember the rest of it, but it's called Seattle Bootleggers. And just the other podcasters I've met, it's been fantastic. The guys from Grit City have been really awesome. The guys from Midday Musing have been really, really awesome. And yeah, it's just been a blast.
Most definitely. No, the Grit City, there's a lot in Tacoma. Tacoma has a lot of history in itself. Like there's a lot in Tacoma.
I love Tacoma. The more I learn about Tacoma, the more I love it. It just has such an interesting history. So many cool people that have come from there. Like we did one on Ray Gamble, who was, they call him the millionaire magician. And he built himself up from nothing into this millionaire. And he had a passion for magic. And so he would hold magic shows in his mansion in Tacoma and was just this larger than life character that was really, really interesting. So it's those type of characters come from Tacoma. I just love it. And the architecture, I love the architecture there. It's beautiful.
Yes. And then the Seattle architecture is just something in itself. Like we have such cool buildings and, Pike Place with the cobblestone still, and just the waterfront, the piers.
Yeah.
A big old Ferris wheel on the water, just on a pier that just
the Great Wheel.
Yeah.
Have you ridden the Great Wheel?
I have, yeah.
Yeah, it's fun. Well, I mean, if you get there a day where it's not fogged in. I've ridden it when the weather was nice and then when you couldn't see anything.
Definitely recommend, if you're going to do it, try to catch it on a nice, clear day.
Yeah.
Very fun, super great. And then go and get some clam chowder while you're down there.
Exactly.
There's nothing like the clam chowder down there on the piers and on the waterfront.
Like the Ivers. Yeah.
There's nothing like it. But no, I have a lot of just great memories just of that area specifically, between the aquarium and the waterfront. There used to be some cool little arcades down there.
Yeah, I think a lot of that has changed because they redid the waterfront when they tore down the viaduct. Seattle's changed a lot. They've torn down a lot of old buildings and put up these crazy condo buildings and retail. The landscape of Seattle has really changed, and unfortunately, in my opinion, not for the better. So there's still some of the old buildings. They really have tried to preserve places like Pioneer Square, which is good, and it's a great tours down there too. By the way, have you ever done the underground tour?
I don't remember. If I have, I don't remember it.
There's a couple of great underground tours there. There's the Bill Speedle tour, which take what they tell you in that with a grain of salt because it's not always historically accurate, apparently. But they're fun. I still say go on them. They're really entertaining. And then another contact I just made, he does the Civil War Seattle history tour. So he got really interested in the connection between people from the Pacific Northwest in the Civil War. So apparently a lot of people in the Civil War, when the war was over, relocated here. And so he's really delved into the history of those people and just history of Seattle in general. So he just started giving some Pioneer Square tours. So that's the Civil War Seattle. He gave us a great tour of the Lakeview Cemetery, which that's where Bruce and Brandon Lee are buried. which that wasn't the point of the tour. It was actually
Right.
Victorian true crime. So that was really, really interesting. So there's a lot of great ways to explore history here. My favorite I talk about in pretty much every podcast until the point where Jody's accusing me of stalking them is the Pretty Gritty tours. So they do mostly Tacoma tours, but you're out in Eastern Washington, right?
Correct. I'm in the Tri-Cities.
Okay. Well, they are starting up tours in the Tri-Cities.
Yes, I've been trying to find them and look them up and get into them. So
Yeah. Well, I'll after this I'll send you the links, but yeah, they're in Olympia, Tacoma, and then now the Tri-Cities, and in fact, may or may not become a tour guide for them. We're going to talk.
nice.
I don't know if I have the bandwidth with my job and the podcast to add on also being a tour guide, but we'll see. It might be fun.
That would be fun. No, that's awesome. And there's a lot here in the Tri-Cities. Like I don't know a lot of it, but I know a lot of the lore. Some of the lore here in the Tri-Cities comes um from the Hanford nuclear site.
Oh yeah. Sorry. Tea
We
time.
have a nuclear site here, Hanford, out in West Richland, and it's a big site. Allegedly, there's been aliens there. Allegedly, there's been UFO stuff there. I mean, because it's a nuclear site, so of
Right.
course.
Right.
But that they have like top secret, like government classified areas
Well,
there
sure.
at the area, and just some big deal kind of stuff. And there's rumors that there's aliens there,
Oh, interesting.
like like aliens that like have been there, that have visited, that have
Uh,
like walked walked it,
Interesting.
and things like that. Like there's some interesting lore with the Hanford
All
nuclear
right.
site,
Well,
because
I'll
that's
have
kind of
to.
how the Tri-Cities started. So
Okay. I'll have to look into that because we are going to do, excuse me, a follow up on the UFO episodes that we've already done because we were going to talk to some of these other people. So maybe we'll wrap it around to the Hanford nuclear site. Yeah, that's cool.
yeah, we've had some interesting stuff. But no,
Excuse me.
I think the biggest thing that changed Seattle was when they tore down the viaduct. Like
Yeah.
that was a big deal. Uh, and that was fairly recently, no, with since COVID or
Oh no, that was before COVID.
okay.
Because the tunnel project, I don't remember. It's been at least 10 years since they tore down the viaduct.
Okay. Maybe I'm just behind.
Yeah, well, I mean,
Um,
COVID took several years of your life away. It put everything on pause,
yeah,
right? So,
yeah. No, I just remember that area. Like I just have so many different memories of it, spending so much time down there as like a child. Because I grew up in South Seattle,
okay.
and so being down there, super close, like bus ride into downtown, lots of time down at Westlake. I
Yeah.
remember when the light rail was just barely being built.
Okay.
Like it was just a big deal that we had light rail going from the airport to the South Center Mall, and like that light rail that's at the Westlake Mall that goes down to the
Oh,
Pacific Science
the
Center.
monorail. Yeah, the
Monorail,
monorail
yeah.
has been around for forever. Yeah, it used to be when I was living in Enumclaw as a kid. It was a big
Mhm,
treat to go into downtown, and we would go to Westlake and go shopping, and we would go to
mhm.
the Seattle Center and ride the monorail from
Yep.
there to Westlake Center. Instead of parking near the Westlake Center, we'd park near the Seattle Center and take the
Mhm.
monorail over, and that was always a treat going down there. And I would always walk by John Fluvog's, which is this like crazy shoe store, and be like, someday when I'm grown up, I'm gonna buy a pair of John Fluvog's. And I never did. It's like,
Fair.
I'm not
Yeah.
spending $300 on those ugly shoes.
they're not.
I have better things
Uh,
to spend my money on.
but yeah, that area was just so like enriching, just between Westlake and then the Seattle Center, because you have like I don't even know what it's called, but they have like the water that shoots up out of the ground, and there was always something going on.
The
Like
big
whenever I
fountain
was
there,
down
yeah.
there, yeah, it was just super fun. And then like back in the day, that you could go like down there, you could spend like a whole like entire day. You could get there in the morning, go and do stuff in the morning, hang around at the Science Center, or the Seattle Center, go and do all the things, and then back in the good old days, in the evening after you're done playing, we would get changed, and then we would go see a Sonics game
Oh, there you go.
later. It was all
Yeah.
right there. Like,
Yeah,
that's
when
one
it
of the
was
coolest things about
Key
the
Arena.
area even still. Yeah,
Yeah.
when it was Key Arena. Yeah.
Yeah, I
But
haven't been
everything's like,
since it got
go ahead.
since the Climate Pledge Arena got built. I haven't been to that one yet. Have you been over
Oh,
there for a game
no,
or
no,
anything?
no.
Well, I'm like, I'm not
Mm-mm.
paying $300 to go to a sports game either.
Yeah, no,
I'm like, I
it's
like hockey,
crazy.
but I'm fine paying $28 to go see the Seattle Thunderbirds play at the ShoWare Center in Kent. That's about as far as I'll go for paying for
Yeah,
sports.
I'll go see the Tri-City Americans. I'll see the Dust Devils. I do beat writing for the Tri-City Dust Devils, so I go to a lot of those games.
Fun.
But there's a lot of cool stuff just within Seattle to do. Like, I think it's one of the only cities I feel that has like all of its sports things all pretty centralized, like actually in
Right.
Seattle.
Yeah,
Like all of its big sports, like the
yeah.
Seahawks, the Sounders, the Mariners, the Kraken. They're all like within like proximity to each other, like a short bus ride or
Mhm.
literally across the street from each other for the Mariners and the Seahawks. Like the stadiums are right
Right.
across the street from each other, and so like games overlap like all the time. Like you'll catch the light rail from Northgate because it doesn't go past Northgate right now. My family that's over there I visit is north of Northgate slightly, and so like you'll get on it and you'll see half the train is like in Mariner stuff,
Yep.
the other half of the train's in Sounders,
Yep.
and it's just so cool. Or like Kraken or whatever, and it's like, and then you see people who are not dressed in anything. It's like, what are you going to do? Oh, I'm going to this other thing
Right.
down there. It's like, whoa, there's always so much going on. Like in Seattle, it's really cool how everything's centralized.
Mhm.
But it's definitely like you mentioned, it's not what it was
No, and when you
20 plus years ago.
yeah, and if you try to go park at one of those games, it's like starts at $40. I guess $80 for parking is not enough. Yeah.
Yeah,
And the
no, it's
cost of living
insane.
down there is just I mean, you're paying $2,200 a month for a one bedroom apartment or in Seattle. It's yeah, or more, depending on what building you're in, you know. That's $2,200 is cheap for a one bedroom.
Yeah, and there's been just so much stuff since COVID that's went on down in Seattle.
Yeah.
I remember going to a Mariners game the 2021 season when things were opening back up, but still driving through Seattle was so weird. Buildings had boards on them all
Yeah.
up and down First Avenue, Second Avenue. Like everything was boarded up, but then there was artwork, like really cool murals on top of the artwork,
Mhm.
where it's like, okay, that's kind of like gives me some hope
Yeah.
that this city will recover from it. Um, but then even with the COVID stuff, there was Chop and Chaz and
Oh yeah.
all that
Yeah.
super fun stuff. I don't know how we got past that. That was great. I'm glad we made it past that.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I feel like every other day, just scrolling any social media that I'm looking at Seattle stuff, there's always something not great coming from Seattle. Very similar with Portland too. There's
Yeah.
always something not great. Like I just saw one today of an Arco down in, oh man, where was it? But it was just dude was cracked out in the middle of a street,
Yeah.
just like on his hands and knees, just drugged out, and
Yeah.
it's just not.
Yeah, there's
It's not
definitely
what it was.
yeah, and there's definitely a substance um a substance abuse disorder crisis happening and a mental health crisis happening. I mean, I've driven past people on their knees on a sidewalk screaming into the void more times than I can count. And it
Yeah.
breaks my heart because I don't, it's like that's a person in crisis and I don't know what to do. And I don't know. I count my lucky stars that I'm lucky enough to not be in that situation. Yeah, it's rough. So, and I don't know what the
100%.
answer is. Nobody seems to have the answer.
The answer, I feel, is that we, as a country, like if you take the country perspective, then you take it state by state. But we as a country are more willing to help everybody else instead of ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
We will more than happily spend billions upon billions of dollars in all these other places that need it, right? Like, yes, they need help and they need support in this monetary fashion, resources, things like that. Like, they do need it. Yes. You take hundreds of billions of dollars and you just pour it back into, if you take care of us,
Mm-hmm.
like, we've dropped in economic, like, superpowers. We've dropped in economic ratings. Like, the dollar's not as strong as it was.
No.
Countries are like, we're not trading in US dollars anymore. Like, countries don't do it anymore. And so we've dropped so far because countries don't believe in us. They don't believe in our dollar because they can clearly see that we don't take care of our own. They can
Right.
clearly see that our education's dropping. They can see that we're doing all these different things, and it's some good, some bad, depending on who you ask and your point of view and whatnot. But the biggest answer is, if we took even half or a quarter to half of this money and put it back into America and into the States and put it into these big cities to create programs or temporary housing, or to create resources to clean this problem up, it's possible. I
Right.
mean, San Francisco did it when they held was it last year? Maybe it was earlier this year, but San Francisco held a conference and they cleaned San Francisco up, like, day and
Interesting.
night different, from the feces and the urine on the
Right.
sidewalks and trash and homeless, and it was cleaned up. It looked like utopia.
Huh. Interesting.
It's possible.
Yeah.
It's possible.
There's two
What they
people.
did with all the people, we don't know.
There's at least two people I know that could actually solve it all. Somebody who has a company called SpaceX and somebody who has a company called Blue Origin. If they didn't spend that money on SpaceX or Blue Origin and put it into that would be enough money probably to take care of it all. But I'm not going to talk
Yeah,
about that. I don't want to talk about. I don't like to get political.
it's there.
I don't like to talk about this sort of policy thing when I don't know enough about it to really speak on it. So yeah.
Fair.
Yeah.
That's all I'll say. The money's there. We see it going all these other places except for ourselves.
Right.
So if we were able to do that, if there was it would be a drastic change. But if we did that and it was planned and allocated for appropriately, then the United States of America would be the superpower of the world.
Right.
We would live
Yeah.
if we took care of ourselves.
Yep.
It's just when it comes to podcasting, when it comes to, taking care of yourself, overcoming your own mental, I don't want to say mental illness, but when it comes to taking care of yourself and self-caring for yourself, you can't take care of others when you're not taking care of yourself.
Yeah, very true.
We're trying to pour from an empty cup, and you can't pour from an empty cup.
Yeah. I feel
So-
that's how I feel these days sometimes. Yeah. Which
So
you
just-
probably
can't
understand too,
pour.
being a professional and a podcaster, and then on top of that, you're a parent. I don't have the kids to take care of, so I don't have that part. But doing my daytime job, the podcast, which is a full part-time job. I mean, it takes me at least 20 hours a week of my life for this podcast and everything that comes with it. If anybody suggests to you out there that you should start a podcast, don't. Unless you have
Yeah.
the time, because it is such a time suck. And for a long, long time, no money. So it's just you doing it
Yeah.
as a hobby. If ever money,
Yeah.
like we haven't gotten to the point where we've made a dime. We've just sinking money into it. So
Yeah.
we're only 8 months in. So, we're still learning and growing every day. But, and then I spend all of my time either working or doing the podcast, and then there's nothing left for me to give to anybody else. My friends are like, we
Mhm.
never see you. And I'm like, well, Jody sees me because she's my
Right.
podcast partner. She's basically my
Right.
other spouse.
Fair enough.
Yeah. Find myself slacking on my housework. I find myself slacking on my yard work. The weeds are going out there, and then I feel guilty because I'm not taking care of it yet. Every day I
Mhm.
work myself ragged until about 9 p.m. and then fall into bed and then wake up at 6 and do it all over again. Yeah. I don't I couldn't help anybody if I wanted to at this point, like you were saying.
It's
Yep,
tis the
exactly.
life. Yeah, no, it's a lot. It definitely comes down to being a lot, and there is a weird guilt that comes along with like podcasting and having a very what I feel for me is like a very strong like creative outlet, a
Mhm.
healthy creative
Yes.
outlet that I really enjoy. Like I look forward to each and every one of my podcast episodes. Like during the month of so we're in the month of June. This probably won't come out during the month of June. It'll come out a bit later. But I've recorded I don't know, I can't even tell you, probably 20-ish episodes during the month of June.
Oh, wow, that's a
Uh,
lot.
There about maybe 20 episodes during the month of June. I have 3 more after our recording in July. I'm looking at,
Wow. Yeah, we don't record that much. But we
yeah, I'm
also,
looking
our episodes, because we're doing a deep dive into history, that means a deep dive. So we spend weeks research. So,
yeah.
and then, after we record, the recording's the fun part, right? Where we spend a couple of hours talking to each other. But then after that, I've got to take that all, and I'm really particular about my editing and my sound. So I spend all those hours editing, adding in the music, adding in sound effects, making sure everything sounds really good, and then creating visuals, creating all of the assets that for social media, creating the show notes, and then
Mhm.
going over to my website and doing it all over there,
Get that. No,
keeping track of your social media and engaging with the people over there. And then they're like, well, you need to also do targeted daily engagement with people on social media. So I got to spend more time on social media. And yeah, by the end of the day, like my personal social media has had no attention. I've got hundreds of messages from all my friends sending me stuff because I'm like, I spend so much time on that for the podcast. I have nothing left over to do the fun part of it. So yeah,
yeah.
it's a lot. I don't definitely don't record that much. Right now we're only releasing 2 of our own episodes a month for the summer. But then I'm doing these feed swaps where I'll drop somebody else's episode in on one of our off weeks, but I do a intro for that as well, and then I also promote that on
Mhm.
social media. So I'm still working on it. Next summer, we're taking the summer off. I'm like, we're doing a season from now on. So,
Yeah, and see, and that's why I hit like recording seasons essentially,
okay, yeah.
like for myself, to where like I'll do a big chunk of recordings
Yeah,
in
you build up like a
a month
bank.
or two. So I'll build up a big bank right now. Like the episodes I'm releasing for all of that I've released all of June and I'll release all of July. This is probably will come out then after. So the episodes I'm releasing from this recording until this recording comes out are all banked episodes. To where they've all been banked, they've all been and the time that you don't spend like it's a balance here, right? Like the
Right.
time you spend in research and deep diving and things like that, I spend in just talking to people and doing that part of it. Well, then I'll take every podcast episode, and then of course you got to come up with like the social media post. You got to come up with the thumbnail. You got to come
Right.
up with, and I don't do any special. I'm not talented enough, nor do I really care that much. I mean, it's a podcast. If I was doing like cool, like pop up stuff and needed to show like statistics and stuff, I will, but I normally don't. But like, cool, look at this. Here's a thing. I shared my screen. That's about as much as you're gonna get. The audio sounds fine enough to me. I like to try to keep it human. So those parts that aren't there are spent in other other areas. I put that into the engagement, the social media
Yeah.
aspect of it, the thumbnails and whatnot. And let me tell you, and I know it's hot, and I know we're getting close on time here, the but AI is a beautiful
Oh my
thing.
gosh, GPT is my best friend.
Yeah, AI is a beautiful thing. Riverside that I record on has some amazing AI features, show notes, keywords,
Cool.
takeaways, bullet points, transcript,
Wow.
everything. Like it just does it. It does it all. And I'm like, I don't even care enough to look at this. I'm not gonna actually read the transcript, Hopefully it's good enough.
Yeah,
The
I'm sure our
captions look
transcripts
fine.
are a nightmare because we're constantly okay. So Jody and I drink champagne while we're recording usually,
Should have done
and
that.
so by the end of it, we're like, okay, we're here. So like the transcript's not going to get that, and we're usually cackling like mad people, so it can't handle that either. So our transcripts are not worth looking at. I don't even bother. I'm like, no, I can't spend my time on that. But yeah, we try to create a really great listening experience because we're telling these stories. We're starting to try to lean a little bit more into that storytelling aspect. We're coming up with some just more descriptive introductions and setting scenes and stuff like that. So and now I'm starting to add some sound effects and I'm adding the music that helps set the mood for the scene. So,
I
so it's
love that.
important for us to focus on the sound and focus on the storytelling aspect and that listening experience. We're just trying to set ourselves apart. There's so many podcasts out there, right? And we're just trying to set ourselves apart to stand out as much as we can. I don't know. Some
100%.
people think we're stupid, I'm sure, but some people like us.
No, and I think that's great. Overall, like that's great because it fits. Like Dawn Brody, she was an old guest of the podcast. She hosts the Health podcast, History I Like to. Um, and
That
she does all
sounds
that
right up my
stuff and
alley.
the sound effects, and you would love it. You would absolutely love this show. She's fantastic. But her podcast sets that 100%. That's the answer right there. If someone tells you you should start, say, "Are you going to be my co-host?" And if they say no, then your answer is no.
Yeah, if somebody tells you to start a podcast, say, "Are you a podcast producer?" and you'll do it for me for free. If they say no, then
Right?
don't do it.
100%.
I had no
No,
idea
absolutely.
getting into this how much work it was going to be. Now, I'm having a blast, even though
Mhm.
it has added so much stress and pressure to my life. But I put a lot of that pressure on
Mhm.
myself. That's one of the things I was
Absolutely.
mentioning to you when I was messaging you last night is I probably am undiagnosed OCD and probably ADHD too. And then I took the AQ test last night. Have you taken that yet?
AQ
The
or
Embrace Autism AQ test, the Autism Spectrum Quotient little quiz self-diagnosis tool.
no, I personally, at least for myself, I really try to stay away from those. I don't recommend like a lot of, at least for me, from my perspective, in like what I do. I don't recommend a lot of people use those unless it's coming from like, unless you're being specifically told by like your mental health professional,
Right.
your therapist, your counselor, your psychiatrist to, here's this, take this under my supervision
Right.
kind
Right.
of thing. I try not to recommend those. So I don't really take them because mostly because of that
Yeah.
standpoint of it, but also I don't actually want to know what this random thing's gonna tell me about me. I want to know.
Yeah, I was really surprised at the score. Now, funnily enough, like I sent it to because I heard about it on the Ono Ross and Carey podcast. They were talking about this, and so
Okay.
I was like, "Oh, let me see what this does for me." And I took it, and I was like, "Interesting." And then my husband took it, and his score was where I would expect it to be. And when I asked him, I didn't tell him what my score was. I didn't give him any expectations, and I was like, "What do you think my score was?" And he just about guessed it. I was like, interesting. Yeah, I mean, I'm not saying I have any. I'm on the autism spectrum at all, but it was just very interesting when I was like, I probably have a lot of undiagnosed mental health issues that I could work on because I see it in myself every day. And this podcast has brought out a lot of them. I don't know if you have the Spotify for Podcasters app on your phone and obsessively check
I
your
do.
downloads like I do, probably
I've
25
gotten a
times a
lot better
day.
at that. I've gotten a lot better at that over time.
Okay.
That's something that'll go with time.
Okay.
Um,
And my
you just
sense of
you
self-worth is tied to these arbitrary numbers in a very
yeah.
unhealthy way.
So very common. I think it's super common. Like I would love to do like just the whole like psychological like research project about how like podcast hosts, like before they started their podcast, they started podcasts. Once they start to understand their analytics and everything a little bit more, how often they do it. I don't think I check my stats like maybe once a day,
Okay.
and I'm like, okay, that's cool. Uh, of course, I see them when I go and share stuff, like when I share a YouTube link or something.
Right.
Like I see it, and I'm like, cool, a couple more subs, or oh, I didn't grow it all today. Oh well, cool. So that's cool. I try not to give it enough like attention because I know, and this is like, well, we can wrap up kind of on this thought and kind of going forward here, but remembering like your why, remembering like why you started,
Right.
remembering your why and your purpose, and that's across everything you do. When
Mhm.
it comes to marriage, why did I get married? Why do I love this person? Why do I keep putting work into this marriage, kind of thing? Why did I want to become a father? Why do I keep putting my best foot forward, kind of thing? What's your why? Finding out your why and part of everything. Like for the podcast, like my why is I intentionally, and you got to be intentional about it too. Like I want to help a million dads, right? Like in some way, shape, or form. I don't know what that way, shape, or form is,
Mhm.
or how I'm going to reach a million different dads, but I want to reach a million different dads and help have some kind of positive impact on their life through the podcast. Whether they laugh, they find a sense of community, they find that they need to go from the back of the gymnasium, they need to go sit in the front row to support the kid. They need to show up more, they need to be more present, they need to be more communicative, they need to work through their stuff. However, the podcast can help them. Every episode, there's hopefully something that they gain from it, whether it's that laugh or like, I heard Jey and Shea talking about the Pacific Northwest. That would be a great next family trip. And then you come and you take your family trip up here and you're thinking about the podcast and you're thinking about us and you're like, wow, this was like super fun and now I have memories with my kids. I helped that dad in that
Right.
relationship with his kids, kind of thing. So every episode, there's a little bit of something there. And so just remembering your why helps your numbers be more digestible, no matter how big or how small. And this was only something that took me more than 100 episodes to clearly define. It wasn't until an off the record conversation I had with a potential like partner of the podcast, and they asked me like, what's your like big goal of the podcast? Like, how would you know like you've like made it as a podcaster, kind of thing? And you've made like the goal and you would be comfortable like stepping away and saying you're good. And I'd be like, I would want to help them. I want to have helped a million people, a million dads improve their relationships within their homes, with their families in some way, shape, or form through the podcast. And well, that's the goal. Will I ever know if I hit a million? Maybe a million people will reach out to me in my DMs and be like, yo, you helped me, kind of thing.
Right.
And I'll be like, awesome, cool, you're 999,999. And they'll be like, oh, let me text my buddy to have him message you too because he loves your podcast, kind of thing. Do I want to be like number one on all the charts when you think of dad podcasts, you think of young dad podcasts, and myself? That would be sick. That'd be super cool. But just remember the why
Right.
in all that you do. Remember why you're doing what you're doing. It could even be in your day job. Why am I here? Oh, I'm here for a paycheck, or I'm here because I want to help people, or I'm here because I care. I'm here because this is, the spot where I felt like I was supposed to be from some divine intervention, God or the universe, whatever your belief system is in that aspect. Whatever your why is, just remember it and keep working at your why. And then the other things, they kind of just fall as they fall.
Mm-hmm.
They don't matter nearly as much because it's like, well, I'm still chasing my why.
Right.
I'm still chasing after it, kind of thing. So,
Yeah, that's good advice. Yeah, I need
and
to.
that's my TED Talk. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm working on trying not to obsess over numbers because the numbers really don't mean anything. But
Mm-mm.
it's hard, I do have a touch of the OCD with it. I'm checking it every 5 minutes, which is very unhealthy. Because if there's no movement,
Yeah.
I'm like, what's wrong with me? Why do people hate me?
I feel that every time when I do check and maybe something went down,
Yes, I've had that
or
happen
maybe
where
I
I was
lost
like,
a couple subscribers, maybe I have
right,
something here, and it's like, and then I have to ask myself again, why do I care?
Right. It's not a personal
Why does it
attack by those
matter?
36 Apple podcast subscribers that left me in the last 90 days. True
And
story.
it's like, I don't even know how to check my Apple Podcast subscribers, so that's
Yeah, probably good, because then you can start looking into your retention numbers and you're like, what happened at minute 14 that everybody shut off the podcast? Oh yeah, you get your retention numbers and you can see
weird.
unfollowers and your follows and your net follows. Yeah, you have to go into the analytics and you can get deep into the nitty gritty.
Oh,
But yeah,
man,
it's,
I didn't even
you know,
know.
we've talked about, we want to inspire curiosity in the Pacific Northwest because we love it here. And so that's really what it is. It's inspired curiosity in ourselves. Jody has said to me many times, she's like, look, I hated history class in high school. I hated having to write book reports. She's like, but now I find myself looking forward to writing a history book report a couple times of a month. She's like, it's the weirdest thing. But now I'm loving this. I'm like, yeah, me too. I'm getting ready tomorrow. This is the sacrifices and the links I will go to for my podcast, is I am going to be starting a book that is 483 pages long and was written in 1907 by a guy in prison.
Is there an audiobook version?
No. The only source for me to get this book is on a Wikipedia. There's like a Wikipedia page that has sources of old books that are like this. That's it. There's nowhere else for me to get this book. I will be skimming a lot of it because I skimmed the first chapter and it was a lot of, I grew up in a small rural town and my father was a good man and then we went hunting for elk. You know, it's that sort of thing. Like that has nothing to do with what I'm trying to get here, which is to the fraud. But yeah.
No, I just discovered Apple Podcast Connect and I'm literally looking at it and I'm like, I don't understand the analytics I'm really looking at. Like I see the categories and whatnot, but
it's the retention numbers that are supposedly the important ones. Because if you've got only 30% listening to the end, people are turning it off. It's very interesting. We made some changes because people were turning it off in the first 3 minutes. You can see where it drops off significantly. And that's where you're like, well, you need to do something about your intro. So we've tightened our intro up and it's gotten better. Anyway, well, hey, I got to get wrapped up here because I got to get off to bed and my husband's probably going to be home from work soon.
We'll wrap up then. That's interesting. So again, but I think the biggest piece of advice there with numbers and everything is just take them for what they are. They're just numbers. They're just analytics, and take them for what they will. Take them with a grain of salt.
Right.
And as long as you're pursuing your why, then you're good.
Yeah,
so
exactly.
But with that, Shea, tell the people where they can find your podcast and where they can learn and keep up with you guys and everything that you're doing.
Well, the best place to go, the one-stop shop, would be our website, which is rainydayrabbitholes.com. There you can actually just listen to the podcast straight from the website, which is really nice. You can subscribe to our newsletter there because we'll send out a monthly newsletter about the different goings on in the Pacific Northwest. And we like to do like this month in history in the Pacific Northwest and talk about something interesting that happened that month sometime in history. Like June, it was the Great Fire of Seattle and also the Pig Wars, which we did an episode about. And then you can also find our links to Facebook and Instagram there. I don't have a link to Threads. I should put that on there too. Threads, I kind of feel like is like my personal thing.
Threads, I believe Threads links straight from.
You can get there from Instagram.
It's literally, there's a badge in your Instagram profile, but make sure that's turned on.
Okay.
You have to toggle that on.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, I'll check that. Thank you. Yeah, and so the website is a great place to go, and you can contact us and message us through the website, and that'll send it to my email if you guys want to say something. If you're one of these people who likes to, for some reason, listen to your podcasts on YouTube, it does it automatically uploads there. There's no video, but you can listen to it on YouTube. My husband, he listens to his music on YouTube for some reason. I was like, we have a Spotify account. I don't understand this, but that's me.
Yeah, I know a lot more people do that, and like I get it. If you're sitting around, like I'll sit and I'll just play it in like the background at work, and I'll let it play, and I'll let it play, and I'll let it play, and I'll let it play. except when I'm talking to someone or on the phone call or with a client or something, that I got to turn that off. I
Right.
don't think anyone wants to listen to that where they're trying
Right.
to tell me that. So it's just important to. I think it's cool. It makes sense. My brother's like, yeah, we put this on while we were doing this thing, and we just put it on YouTube, and it was great, kind of thing. And I'm like, that doesn't like that makes sense, but why?
Yeah.
So everyone's different.
Yep.
To each their
Everyone's
own.
different.
But Shea, you coming on
Well, thanks for
tonight? I
having
appreciate
me.
you being here with me. And it's been a pleasure talking to you. And to all our listeners, thanks so much for tuning in. Make sure you do the things that you do to just to support the podcast. Listen to Shea, listen to this podcast, and go and follow, subscribe, like, do all the things that you can to show your love for the podcast on the various platforms that are out there. And do that thing to show your love. And make sure after you turn off this episode, after it ends, get up, get off the couch, go throw away your snack wrapper, go throw away your juice box. It's empty. And have a great rest of your day until we talk to you next time.
Bye.